Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We did have quite a few people sign up, and I hope those of you that really wanted to attend are here with us today. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeremy Colvin, Application Engineer with Progression Technologies. Today our Friday CAD Chat topic will be EPDM tips and tricks, a few things about the data card that I wanted to share. So hopefully we can get this all in, I think so, in next few 30 minutes or so. Please, if you have any questions, just to let you know, oops, hold on a second. Just to let you know, the control panel, once again, that you should be able to access has a questions panel. There you can enter any questions, and I'll do my best to try and answer them before we leave today. You can also expand or collapse that panel so you can see more of the screen using that orange arrow right there at the top. Once again, I'll try and address questions towards the end, just in case you had any. Enter them in that panel that you see over there under questions. Okay. For the data cards within EPDM, they are the primary method for the user's input and consumption of data. So this is a very, very important interface. They access these, of course, when they select files or folders and so on within the EPDM Explorer interface. These cards are fully tailorable to whatever your company needs. So you can add as many controls or as few controls as you like for various different file types. The data cards can be accessed through the admin tool. One way is to go into that cards node that you see in the admin tool there. Expanding it, you'll find the different card types. Focusing mostly on the file cards today, but generally it's all similar. Double-clicking on a particular card will then open it in the data card editor. Now that's a separate tool from the admin tool, just to emphasize that point, and that'll come up in just a second, why that's so important. Another way to access the card editor, you can right mouse button click, RMB, on the cards themselves, on the card node there in the tree, and select Open Card Editor, or if you'd like, you can select New Card, which will open the new card inside the card editor, where you can just begin design. Now, here's why I want to emphasize that it's a separate interface or application. The card editor requires its own separate login. Now, this is sometimes very confusing because what it uses is not the admin login that you use perhaps in the admin tool. It'll actually use your user login to the Vault view. So if particularly the PDM administrator, if you're logging into the admin tool using the admin login, it will then use your Vault login, Vault view login, which may be a different user with different rights. That's why it's so important. These rights are very important to let you be able to edit those cards, layouts and so forth, adding new controls, removing controls, and so on. Folder permissions can be assigned, can update the design of cards. That's in the folder permissions within the user rights or group rights. This is important to allow them to be able to edit these cards. Now, it's important to understand, too, that that's not perhaps the full permissions that might be required. When you're editing data cards, there are other things that we might need to edit. Other permissions that may be required could be found in the administrative permissions within the group or user permissions area. You might have to give those groups or group of users the update variable options and capabilities. Also, because drop-down lists may be tied to card lists inside of the admin tool, you might have to also give them the update card lists option as well. This will allow them to be able to edit whatever they need to edit to be able to provide the proper user interfaces within these data cards. So one thing, we'll start getting into some of the tips and tricks and so forth. So one of the things I want to point out, first tip, there is no undo. That's very important you understand. If you happen to delete, move, or otherwise modify the controls on the data cards, it's important to remember that you can't use Control-Z or anything like that to undo those modifications. You're going to have to basically close the card without saving and then reopen it and essentially make the same modifications or begin modifying once again. So the main tip is to save often as you're editing these data cards. Save often. So if there is perhaps some change that was made inadvertently, you can always close it and reopen it and then begin modifying once again. One other tip I want to remind you about is, as you're making these changes, as soon as you save those changes, those changes become immediately accessible and apply to the users. So as they select their next file, particular file, in this case you see an assembly card in front of us, if we were to make a change to that data card and save it, the next time a user picks on an assembly, those changes would be immediately visible to the user. And particularly if there's any changes to what variables may have been changed and so on. So sometimes I've seen folks change a variable on a control. The data that may have been saved on that control for that previous variable will then be disappeared. They'll just be gone because it's stored in a different variable than the one you changed it to. So it's important to remember a few things there. Okay? Another quick tip I like to mention. When you're working in the card editor, there is this window interface within the card editor you see on the left side where we see that assembly card. It's sort of, the window is framed around the card itself. It's not maximized or stretched in any way. It's framed nice and neat around the card controls and so on, as opposed to the one you see on the right where it's maximized. The window has been maximized. Or even if you stretch that frame, that window of the card itself, all of this free space that you see here can be distracting. Maybe not so much to you, or maybe it is to you, it doesn't matter. When you see it maximized like this, the user interface that you'll see over in the Explorer interface, it'll help to keep it a cleaner interface. Here you can see from our previous view where we had it framed right around the card, this is the type of interface the users will see. A little bit cleaner than something like this where it was maximized and then saved, where you have all this free white space here. Just keeps a nice cleaner interface when you're working within Explorer. Another tip, this is a question that comes up from time to time, so I thought I'd pop that in here just to understand the relationship between the files themselves, file types, and the cards. Some folks have talked about when they're wanting to manage certain files, the file type may not be part of EPDM. To add any new file type, really all you need to do is add that file extension to a data card or create a new data card for that file extension. You can see the area here on the right where it lists the file extensions separated once again by semicolons. You'll see them listed here. So if I needed to manage a new file and I wanted to use this data card to manage that, in other words enter data concerning that file type, all you need to do is put a semicolon and that file extension. Now there's no dot, just the file extension itself, and that file extension will then show up under the file types because now it will be managed within EPDM. Some just kind of complimentary notes or perhaps comments. The variables themselves, you can map again those properties. This is not really a data card issue but necessarily related. The data card has those variables. Those variables then have links perhaps to the files themselves. Some files can store compound information, some can't. So you can link the variables to custom properties or things like that. This one's not so often used but can be helpful. Control logic. Within the data card editor, you'll find the menu control here at the top under control. If you select control, the one option you'll have is control logic, which will open this dialog box here. What we can do after selecting a control, and in this example scenario, I'll just give you the outline here, we have vendor. That vendor control, which is a list box, basically is defining what vendor we want to assign to this. Now, particularly when a part is purchased, that's when a vendor would be selected. But if the part is built, then a vendor wouldn't really apply. So in the control logic, what we're defining here is the action to take place is to gray out the vendor control if the part type, which is the variable linked to these two controls here, these radio buttons, if that part type equals built. Again, if the part type is built, we will simply gray out or disable that vendor control. The other action that can be performed besides graying out would be hide. So you can actually hide any control. And again, this can be useful based on a selection that might be made. If a user picks a particular selection, then you show several more controls because that becomes relevant given that selection. So the control logic can be helpful just to kind of give the user interface the proper automation, if you will, so the users don't get themselves in trouble. We hope. Another quick tip that's very important to understand concerning data cards is, particularly file cards here in this case, and folder cards for that matter, which card is to be used is dependent on where that card is saved. Now in general, cards are saved at the root of the vault and apply to any folder and subfolder then within that vault. However, if you would like a data card to apply to a particular folder, now in this example Human Resources is selected, they may have a different Office card for Word documents and Excel files and so forth than does Engineering. We can design these cards differently and save them to those folders, inside those folders. If that's the case, those data cards then apply to that folder and any subfolder within them. This can be very useful to really tailor the interfaces depending on what groups, what departments, what divisions you might be working within EPDM. A different option, somewhat related to what I was just mentioning. In some cases, you might want a particular data card to be saved within a certain folder structure, but then again, the Word documents can take up different roles. So one card can serve many roles. What we might use is the controlled by variable option that you see in the interface on the right side. We'll see in just a second. But I want to outline here very quickly what this really entails. The scenario I'm giving you here is we have a control and it's linked to a variable called doc type. That doc type control variable has these three options: Office, Specification, and Bill of Material. What you'll notice is there's a tab interface, a tab control, with those same entries on each of those tabs. So what we might do is select the tab interface, and to the right you'll see the control by variable. There we select the doc type. Once again, the tab interface has the exact same entries as that list box that was used for that drop-down list doc type. This is very important. Ensure that the names match the list for doc type drop-down control. If they don't match, they won't select themselves properly. The intent here is that when a user picks Office, then it only shows the Office tab. If they pick Specification, then it would select and show them the Specification tab. That's a great way to really take one card for a specific file type at the same level, same folder, but then change the interface based on selections made by the user. What we'll see then is that when selections are made here using that drop-down list box where we have Office selected, it's only going to show us the Office card. But if they were to choose Specification, then it changes to the Specification tab where we have all the specific controls with different description, number, and so forth that may apply just to those specifications, and again, bill of materials and so on. So that option, using the control by option for those controls in the data card, can be very, very useful when you have a specific card working for the same file types. Another quick tip that I find very useful: populating data, trying to really not require the user to enter the same data more than once is very important. Really saves on productivity and so forth, and user satisfaction, I think. In this case, you can populate file data cards or data information from the folder card entries or folder card data that might be created already. Here you can see the folder card. Once again, it looks very similar to data card and card type. And here we have project name. That project name control linked to the project name variable is filled in at the folder card level. Here you'll see a part card where we have that same entry and it's linking to the same variable. What will happen as we add files to that folder, if we have this option here, folder card variable, and identified that same variable to populate from, as they add a file to that folder, it will extract, if you will, or get that information from the folder itself, the project name, and then populate the file card with that same information, saving a tremendous amount of time, I think, in data entry. Another option I wanted to mention too is the default overrides. In this case, you can see once again that card where it's linked to that folder card data, populating and pulling that project name. Here I've checked the box for default overrides. Now the main reason for this, if the user may copy a file, an existing file, let's say, in that folder, When they do a copy-paste, if it's been populated with information, and then information might be populated down to the file, in this case maybe that SOLIDWORKS part, typically it's going to use the existing data or information in that part file, should there be a link. What this option does is overwrites that information with the information being pulled. Very important that you do this if you're adding new files. Now again, this may not be necessary and may not be desired if you really want them to be entering information manually and so forth. It might be beneficial to leave that turned off. But in general, the default overwrites is used to overwrite any pre-existing information. Okay? One more little tip I want to mention is using the import formulas to define variable values. It's way down here at the bottom. Input formulas. When I select an input control, in this case there's a keywords control that I put on that data card. And in this case what I'm defining is the description, the project name, and part type, separated by commas. This is useful to update an input field based on user changes or entries. Now generally this works best with drop-down list boxes and radio buttons and things like that, because there's an important caveat or note here. As we input the information, the input formula will only build or update itself, the evaluated string, when values are manually entered. So it's important to understand it really doesn't update that edit box with the new information until the user might change a variable, a selection from the list box, or again the radio buttons and so forth. Also, updating linked properties inside a file will not trigger the input formula to evaluate. What that means is, let's say we have a linked variable like description inside of a SOLIDWORKS drawing or part. If I were to update the description custom property inside the part or drawing, that will not trigger an update to evaluate that control on the data card. So it won't help. Using default values from the folder data card also will not trigger the input formula to evaluate. So we can't really update those variable formulas if the data input is updated from the folder data card. Okay, so really it all comes back to the fact that if we do an input formula, generally it's going to be evaluated or re-evaluated based on manual entry or selections. Okay, kind of important to keep that in mind. So just a few quick tips and tricks on data cards, just a short little discussion. Hopefully you've gotten some good information today. I don't see too many, I see a test in the questions panel. Thank you, Richard. If anybody has any questions, they can use the questions panel located on the right side of the screen, of course, and I'll try to address and answer those. Okay, don't see any questions coming in. So let me just quickly point out, if you have any questions, please feel free to email support@progressiontech.com. You can also call the support line 877, the toll-free number, 967-5780, extension 2, to get to our support. If you'd like to get some demonstrations or discussions going on any SOLIDWORKS products, you can use extension 1 at that same number, or you can email at sales@progressiontech.com to get a demonstration scheduled, and we can come in and talk about any SOLIDWORKS products you'd like to discuss. And finally, just last quick note, double check our website. You can always go to the events area and see what upcoming events we have scheduled. The next couple of Friday CAD chats coming up. SOLIDWORKS 2015 enhancements discussing weldments. That'll be on the 11th. Creating custom appearances inside of SOLIDWORKS. You can also see that on September 18th. So please join us on those dates. And again, I still don't see any questions, so if you don't have any questions, I'll just go ahead and say thank you all for joining us this Friday on our Friday CAD Chat, and I definitely hope everyone has an excellent weekend.